My sister sold my rare book collection for a designer bag. I didn't scream. I tracked down the books and left a receipt on her bed. Her panic was priceless. So there I was, getting home from my Tuesday shift at the coffee shop, totally ready to dive into this first edition Hemingway I'd been saving for weeks. You know that feeling when you've got the perfect book waiting and maybe a cold Dr. Pepper in the fridge? Yeah, that was my vibe. Except when I walked into my apartment, my entire bookshelf looked like someone had taken a weed whacker to it. I'm talking about my babies here, not just any random paperbacks from Target. These were legitimate, rare books I'd been collecting since I was like 16. First editions, signed copies, books that cost me more than my monthly grocery budget. Some of them were gifts from my grandmother who understood my obsession with old literature. Others I'd hunted down at estate sales, spending entire weekends driving around in my beat-up Honda Civic looking for treasures. My hands were literally shaking as I counted what was missing. The Hemingway, a signed copy of To Kill a Mockingbird, a first edition Catcher in the Rye that took me 2 years to save up for. Gone, all of it. Now I live alone, and only 3 people have keys to my place. My landlord, my best friend Jake, and my sister Madison. Jake's been my ride or die since college. He'd rather eat his own shoe than touch my books. The landlord's this sweet old dude who probably doesn't even know what Instagram is. That left one person. I pulled out my phone and did what any reasonable person does when they're having a complete meltdown. I scrolled through social media like my life depended on it, and there it was. Posted 6 hours ago on Madison's Instagram story, a picture of her manicured hands holding a brand new Chanel bag. Not just any Chanel bag, one of those quilted ones that cost more than most people's rent. The caption? Treating myself because I deserve it. Sometimes you gotta make sacrifices for the things you really want. My stomach dropped faster than a rock off a cliff. Update. Guys, I'm literally sitting in my car outside a bookstore right now trying to figure out my next move. Part of me wants to call her and scream, but something tells me there's more to this story. Should I confront her directly or do some detective work first? This whole situation feels way bigger than just missing books. I drove straight to the Book Nook, this little used bookstore downtown where all the collectors hang out. The owner, Mr. Peterson, knows me pretty well since I've been buying from him for years. When I walked in, he took one look at my face and knew something was wrong. Let me guess, he said, adjusting his thick glasses. Someone sold your collection? Turns out Madison had waltzed in there 3 days ago with a cardboard box full of my books. She'd spun this whole story about how they belonged to her ex-boyfriend who'd left them behind, and she just wanted to get rid of them. Mr. Peterson said she seemed nervous but insisted she had every right to sell them. The kicker? She'd sold books worth probably $3,000 for $800. 800. That Hemingway alone was worth more than that. Mr. Peterson felt terrible when I explained the situation. He showed me the receipt and everything. Madison had signed it with her real name. Not exactly criminal mastermind material here. He'd already sold a few of the books to other collectors, but most were still in the back room. Driving home, my mind was racing faster than a NASCAR driver on Red Bull. This wasn't just about the books anymore. This was about Madison stealing. Something she knew meant everything to me to buy something she wanted. This was about her looking me in the eye at family dinner last week and asking how my little book hobby was going while knowing she'd already sold half my collection. See, Madison and I have always been different. She's the type who posts selfies at Starbucks with captions about living her best life, while I'm the one who'd rather spend Friday night reading than bar hopping. She's always made little comments about my books, calling them dusty, asking why I don't just use a Kindle, rolling her eyes when I'd get excited about finding a rare edition, but I never thought she'd actually do something like this. I remember, when we were kids, she'd borrow my favorite toys and then claim she'd lost them. When we got older, it was clothes, makeup, whatever caught her eye. Mom always said it was just sibling stuff, that Madison would grow out of it. Well, we're 27 and 24 now, and clearly she hasn't grown out of anything. That night, I did what any self-respecting millennial does when they need to process drama. I called Jake and ordered way too much Chinese food. Dude, that's absolutely insane, Jake said, nearly spitting out his lemonade. Like, I knew Madison was kind of selfish, but this is next level. We spent hours going through my phone, screenshotting everything. Madison's Instagram posts about the bag, text messages where she'd asked to borrow money from me over the past few months, a conversation from last Christmas where she'd complained about how I spent too much money on stupid old books. Jake, bless his heart, had this brilliant idea to check if Madison had posted anything else about selling stuff. Sure enough, we found a Facebook post in a local buy and sell group from 3 days ago. Selling vintage books, great condition, need gone ASAP. The evidence was piling up like pancakes at IHOP. Update, plot twist. I found out exactly how much that bag cost and where she bought it. I also discovered she's been bragging to her friends about her smart business move. The level of betrayal is honestly impressive. Now I'm torn between wanting justice and wanting to handle this like a mature adult. What would you do? The next morning, I took a personal day from work and drove back to the Book Nook with my debit card and a plan. Mr. Peterson had already pulled all my remaining books aside and was holding them for me. Between what he still had and what I could track, down from the other collectors he'd sold to, I managed to get about 80% of my collection back. It cost me $1,200. $1,200 of my own money to buy back my own books. But here's the thing, I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. I drove to the mall where Madison had bought the bag, Nordstrom, because of course it was Nordstrom. I walked up to the handbag counter like I owned the place and explained my situation to this really sweet sales associate named Jennifer. Oh, honey, Jennifer said, her eyes going wide. I remember that sale. She paid cash, which was unusual for such an expensive purchase. Let me check our records. Turns out Madison had paid exactly $800 in cash for a bag that retailed for $2,800. She'd bought it from their clearance section. It had a tiny scratch on the back that most people wouldn't even notice. Jennifer was incredibly helpful. She printed out a receipt showing the exact date and time of purchase, which happened to be about 2 hours after Madison had sold my books. The timeline was perfect. I spent the rest of the day creating what I like to call my evidence portfolio. Screenshots, receipts, witness statements from Mr. Peterson, everything organized in a neat little folder like I was building a court case. Then I did something that probably sounds petty but felt absolutely necessary at the time. I went to Office Depot and got one of those laminated document protectors. I put the receipt from buying back my own books inside it, along with a note that said, "My books weren't your emergency fund. This is what it cost me to fix your mistake." That evening, I used my spare key to Madison's apartment while she was at her yoga class. I didn't touch anything else, just placed that receipt and note right on her pillow where she couldn't miss it. Then I went home and waited. The call came at 11:47 p.m. What the heck is this supposed to mean? Madison's voice was shrill through the phone. I think it's pretty self-explanatory, I said, surprised by how calm I sounded. You stole my books and sold them. I bought them back. That's the receipt. I didn't steal anything. Those books were just sitting there collecting dust. You never even read half of them. Madison, they weren't yours to sell. That's literally the definition of stealing. She tried every excuse in the book. The books were taking up space. I had too many anyway. She was going to pay me back eventually. She needed the money for something important. A handbag isn't important, Madison. Those books were my passion, my hobby, something I'd been building for over 10 years. It's just books. You can buy more books. That's when I realized she genuinely didn't understand. To her, my collection was just stuff taking up space. She couldn't comprehend that some of those books were irreplaceable, that they held memories and meaning beyond their monetary value. I'm telling Mom and Dad. I said, you wouldn't. Watch me. Update. Family dinner is tomorrow night and I'm planning to lay out everything. I've got receipts, screenshots, and witnesses. Madison has been blowing up my phone all day, alternating between apologies and accusations. She even tried to get our cousin to mediate. This is about to get real messy, but I'm ready. Any last-minute advice for confronting family drama? Sunday dinner at my parents' house is usually this relaxed thing where we eat Mom's famous pot roast and catch up on everyone's week. Madison and I have been doing this routine since we moved out, showing up, pretending everything's fine, making small talk about work and weather. This Sunday was different. I showed up early and asked to talk to Mom and Dad privately. They could tell something was serious by the way I was clutching my folder of evidence like it contained state secrets. Honey, what's wrong? Mom asked, settling into her favorite chair with that concerned parent look. I laid it all out. Every detail, every receipt, every screenshot. I showed them the timeline of Madison selling my books and buying the bag. I showed them Mr. Peterson's statement confirming the sale. I even played them the voicemail Madison had left me the night before, where she'd called me selfish and dramatic for making such a big deal out of some old books. Dad's face went through about 5 different emotions in the span of 2 minutes. Mom just kept saying, "Oh my goodness," over and over. She stole from you, Dad said finally, his voice quiet but firm. This isn't borrowing or a misunderstanding. She stole your property and sold it. When Madison walked in 20 minutes later, the atmosphere in the house was like that moment before a thunderstorm when the air gets all heavy and weird. "Hey everyone," she said, her voice artificially bright. She was carrying the Chanel bag because of course she was. "Madison, we need to talk," Mom said. You could literally watch Madison's face change as she realized what was happening. Her smile faltered, then disappeared completely. "She told you her version, didn't she?" Madison said, glaring at me. "Did she mention how she hoards books like some kind of weird collector? Did she tell you how she spends hundreds of dollars on books instead of investing in her future? Did you sell her books to buy that bag?" Dad asked directly. Madison's silence was louder than any confession. "They were just sitting there," she said finally. "She has so many books, I didn't think she'd even notice a few were missing." "A few?" I pulled out my list. 14 books, Madison, including a first edition Hemingway and a signed Harper Lee. "You're being dramatic." "Am I?" I showed everyone the receipt from buying back my own books. I had to spend $1,200 to get back 80% of what you stole. The room went completely silent. Mom started crying. Not loud sobbing, just these quiet tears that somehow made everything worse. "Madison Rose," Dad said, using her full name like when we were kids in trouble. "This is theft. This is betraying your sister's trust in the worst possible way." Madison tried to defend herself, but every excuse just made her sound worse. She said I was being selfish for not sharing. She said the books were an investment I wasn't using properly. She said she'd been planning to pay me back eventually. "When?" I asked. "When were you planning to pay me back? Before or after you posted on Instagram about treating yourself?" She didn't have an answer for that. The conversation went on for another hour, with Madison alternating between defensive anger and fake tears. She kept trying to make it seem like I was the unreasonable one, like I was destroying our family over material possessions. Finally, Dad had enough. "You're going to return that bag," he said, "and you're going to pay your sister back every penny this cost her." "I can't return it. It's been 3 weeks. Then you'll figure something else out." Madison stormed out, but not before turning to me and saying, "I hope you're happy. You've ruined everything over some stupid books." After she left, Mom hugged me for about 10 minutes straight. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart," she kept saying. "I'm so sorry we didn't protect you from this." The next few days were intense. Madison called and texted constantly, switching between apologies and accusations. She told me I was tearing the family apart. She said I was being vindictive and cruel. She even tried to get our extended family involved, calling our aunts and cousins to tell them her version of the story. That backfired spectacularly. Turns out Madison had borrowed things from other family members over the years too. Our cousin Emma revealed that Madison had taken a necklace from her jewelry box during Christmas and never returned it. Our Aunt Sarah mentioned that some of her expensive makeup had gone missing after Madison stayed over last summer. Suddenly, everyone was sharing their own Madison stories, and the pattern was impossible to ignore. Madison's social media presence changed dramatically. The posts about her amazing new bag disappeared. She stopped posting altogether for a while, which for someone who usually shared 3 Instagram stories a day was basically admitting defeat. Mom called me about a week later to let me know that Madison had finally managed to return the bag to Nordstrom. Apparently, Jennifer, the sales associate, remembered the situation and made an exception to their return policy. Madison got $600 back, less than what she'd paid because of restocking fees and the fact that she'd carried it around for weeks. "She wants to give you the money," Mom said. "That's not enough," I replied. "She owes me $1,200, not $600. It took another month of family pressure before Madison finally came up with the rest of the money. She had to sell some of her other designer stuff and pick up extra shifts at her marketing job. Every time she complained about being broke, someone in the family would remind her why. The hardest part wasn't getting the money back, though. It was realizing that my sister, the person I'd grown up with and trusted with my apartment key, had looked at something I loved and seen nothing but dollar signs. I changed my locks. I know that sounds dramatic, but I couldn't handle the idea of Madison having access to my space anymore. When she found out, she accused me of being paranoid and holding grudges. "This is supposed to be about forgiveness," she said during one of our last real conversations. "Forgiveness doesn't mean giving you another chance to steal from me," I replied. I ended up telling the whole story to some of my friends, partly because I needed to process it, and partly because I wanted people to understand why I was suddenly so protective of my stuff. The response was overwhelming. Jake started a little crowdfunding thing among our friend group to help me replace the books I couldn't get back. My coworker Maria turned out to be a book collector too, and she hooked me up with some dealers who had copies of what I was missing. Even Mr. Peterson at the Book Nook started setting aside interesting finds for me, usually at a discount because he still felt bad about the whole situation. Slowly, my collection started growing again. But more importantly, I started appreciating it differently. Every book felt more precious because I'd almost lost them all. I started reading more, engaging with my hobby instead of just collecting. I also started a little book blog, mostly just reviews and photos of interesting finds. It wasn't anything fancy, just a way to share my passion with people who got it. The blog ended up connecting me with other collectors, and I made some genuine friendships through our shared love of literature. Madison. And I barely talk now. We're civil at family gatherings, but the trust is gone. She still thinks I overreacted, and I still think she fundamentally doesn't understand what she did wrong. Maybe someday we'll work through it, but right now, I'm okay with keeping my distance. Our parents have been amazing through all of this. Dad helped me install better locks on my apartment, and Mom has started asking more detailed questions about my book collecting, actually showing interest instead of just politely nodding along. The whole experience taught me something important about boundaries and self-respect. For years, I'd been the peacekeeper in our family, the one who smoothed over Madison's selfish moments and made excuses for her behavior. I'd convinced myself that keeping the peace was more important than standing up for myself. But there's a difference between being understanding and being a doormat. There's a difference between forgiveness and enabling. And there's definitely a difference between sharing and having your stuff stolen. 6 months later, I'm in such a better place. My book collection is almost back to where it was, plus some new additions I never would have found otherwise. I've got this cozy reading corner in my apartment with a comfortable chair and good lighting. On weekends, I'll sit there with a cup of coffee and one of my treasured books, and I feel completely content. Madison still carries designer bags, though now she has to actually pay for them herself. Last I heard, she was complaining to Mom about how expensive everything is and how unfair it is that she has to budget so carefully. I don't feel bad for her. Actions have consequences, and she's finally learning that lesson at 24 years old. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I'd never found out about the books, if Madison had been more careful about her social media posts. Would she have done it again? Would I have eventually noticed more things going missing? I'm glad I don't have to find out. These days, when people ask me about the situation, I usually just say my sister and I had a falling out over some stolen property. I don't need to get into all the details unless they're really close friends, but I'm not ashamed of how I handled it. I stood up for myself, I got justice, and I protected my future from someone who had proven she couldn't be trusted. My books are back where they belong, safe and sound on my shelves. And honestly, that's all that really matters to me.